So thank you so much, Ben, Liz, and Corey, for sharing your experiences with us and getting us all thinking and realizing that most of us have a lot of work to do when we get back to the office to keep up with you. I think we're going to take questions from the audience in a moment, but I think just for myself as a non-technical person, a non-researcher, non-educator, non-teacher, sitting and listening to the experimentation that's been going on to try to take something that was really not intended initially for educational use, but getting the most out of it to accomplish your missions is really inspiring. Ben shared with us the ways in which three-dimensional technology can augment and correct the historical record and give us the ability to see things as they were, not as they are now when you happen to find it. Liz shared with us about how using 3D technology to experience the beauty and message behind art gives audiences another way to receive and experience an artist's vision, and also brings those objects closer to the people by giving them the chance to remix and find their own ways to bring them to life. And she also talked about experimenting with some new solutions to some old problems using the technology that we now have. And finally, Corey gave us some really interesting examples of how 3D technology can allow kids to design, develop, and dream, and take things that either can't be seen or understood with the naked eye and make them so that they can be held in the palm of a hand and better understood. And then kind of ended with a little bit of guerrilla tactics of 3D on the road, thinking about how to bring the experience, objects, and sites that are out there in the world back into the classroom to give kids an even more inspiring way to learn. So I think we had a lot of wonderful examples today of the possibilities of what this technology can really do for all of the educational missions that we're engaged in. Before I throw it out to the audience, though, I do want to ask the panelists to reflect for a moment. Since you got to hear the presentations of your colleagues for the first time today, what was the thing that most surprised you about what you learned about what the other panelists are up to these days? Did you get any ideas about how you might take something that someone else has done and co-opt it a bit for your work?
I think I can speak towards that first off, because you guys had such kind of similar ideas as well, and with education, and it really is the fact that nowadays, why not go and buy a printer? Why not go and find a 123D catch, or go and find a cheap laser scanner? It's very much, it's there for everybody to take and grab and start using it and interpreting it how they want. And nowadays, I was at a high school the other day, had a meeting about STEM, and this was a tier 1 high school with no money at all. And we were saying, oh, 3D printing's pretty cool, and they went, oh, want to come upstairs and see our 3D printer? The kids had just designed a wing. They had a guy from Boeing in there teaching them about wing design. I mean, when I was at school, I mean, I'm not that old, but when I was at school, we had no computer, background or CAD design or anything, and these kids were walking out with, AutoCAD training at, 16, 17. So
it's amazing how quickly it's changing. Any other observations, Liz or Corey, before we throw it out to the audience?
I mean, it's the whole aspect of how museums interact with the public is definitely, and researchers interact with the public is a big exciting part of this, and seeing how makerspaces and museums and how to make those partnerships between schools, museums, and researchers. That's a very obvious way to make make that pathway much more productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with that, is that I want to make sure that we make that connection, that we're not talking about different things, because if when you publish your data, we can use that data in a lot of different ways. Researchers can use it. We can use it to mash it up with something else in a way that you totally did not intend when you made the boat, or when you scanned the boat, that we might use it in a different way to learn about it from a different angle. And I think that that's what's so important about keeping all this information out there, published, shared, whether it's a do-it-yourself copy from your travels around, or it's a scientific, that's what's just access to what's out there so that we can really work with it is really important.
Agreed. I think there's so many opportunities, and we do so much better when we work together, since we all bring a different perspective and a different expertise to the table. So with that, let's open it up for questions. I think Gunter and one of his colleagues is going to be out there with a microphone, and we will need you to speak directly into the microphone since we are webcasting today,
all right,
to make sure that folks out there can hear what you're saying.
We've got a question over here. Hi, Mike O'Hanlon. I'm with a company called Imagineering Art up in Toronto. We deal very much in the educational space. And one of the things, I mean, we've heard a lot of discussion about the objects and reproducing objects. But what's happening or what should be happening on the metadata side? Like, how do we make sure that the curated metadata, the data that should accompany the object, continues to accompany the object as it flows through the various scientific and educational systems?
I'll take that first, just quick, because I do manage collection information and the collection information system that we have at the Art Institute. And so one thing that we try to do is, especially for our own published scans, is make sure that we have a certain amount of information and then a link back to the collection record, because we don't want to just copy the information because that information changes all the time. So just get enough of an identifier, a title, say, and then a link back to our collection management system. And then in our collection management system, we're starting to have links there out saying, you know, this is going to an external website, but so that people can get to it from that direction as well. But I think to a certain extent, if the people are out there in the world and they're scanning themselves, we can show a model of how things get scanned, but we can't force that. But for ourselves, definitely to link back so that people can learn more. They can see what other resources we have. We might have a video about that. We might have other things, or maybe with the new Explorer, that'll be all together. But
I think one of the big things is thinking about how do we put these things in context. Because there's something that I know that's missing today from going to the library when I was growing up, and I was talking to someone about this yesterday at lunch, and really reminded me about just being able to discover things that you weren't looking for. And so the idea of how can we put these things in context in time and place, where if we do put something up about William Penn, we can then unite that with other groups that have things from that similar time and place, where they can learn about other parts of lives that were taking place in Philadelphia. And is there a way that we can really unite this based upon location data and timestamp, so that we can then correlate objects with similar histories or similar context that could actually unite these things in a way that would make it accessible, and where you can just have like a Google Earth viewer where you can slide back and forth in time and be able to view all these different sort of point images in a way that could really bring them to an exploration more than a sort of point research idea.
Ben, how is the research community dealing with this? I mean, you have a richness of data that's pretty impressive. So are there protocols and?
And for us, you know, ever since day one, and we started excavating, you know, 2000, 2001, and that was an access database. And, you know, nowadays you get a nice HTML system or a SQL database. But intrinsically, the object that comes out isn't the whole story. So, you know, for instance, we've got a coin that we found inside the submarine, and that coin has been engraved, and it actually saved one of the captain's life when he got shot in the leg, and it's bent. There's enormous amounts of data that go along with that single artifact. So for me, it's more a case of the 3D coming in to serve the rest of the data. So it's as if wherever the data goes, 3D should move with it. So it's as if they should begin working in unison. And now if there's a change to the metadata, then that should always be correlated with the 3D. So they've just got to follow each other, and it's however you decide to view it is up to you. But for us, you know, it's just going to be through a HTML database. And as long as we have people updating it, and if there are changes to the conservation record or the archaeological record, it's up to them to change it. So for us right now, we just try and keep them together as much as possible.
Hi, I'm Deb Haynes, University of Tennessee, and this is directed to Liz. I'm sort of curious on, your 3 questions. Did you consider videotaping the actual dynamics of when you were doing these tests using the 3D within the structure that you had last weekend? And what did that reveal to not only the participants, but also to the people who created the structure of the event? Is that clear?
I think so, and you can tell me if I'm going down a wrong path. We didn't videotape it. We did do, we had 4 kinds of instruments that we evaluated the day. So 2 were based on interviews, so of intercepting visitors and bringing them to the side and doing interviews, and then 2 observations. 1 observation in the gallery space where we were doing scanning, and another one in the shared space where we were doing the reconstructomy and the printing and the Play-Doh. So I don't know if we actually I can't recall if we considered videotaping. I think we probably thought that since it was a day-long program, that might not be, and to have that in the space the whole time. We did have difficulty collecting some of the data because it's a family festival, and this is part of a lot of things going on in the museum. And I sure learned a lot about family festivals, let me tell you. The parents that are there, they want to get a lot of things done. So getting the visitor intercepts to actually do the interviews, we'll probably have a fairly small sample set of that. It's been too soon to look at the data. The evaluators are pulling that together. But so I think for each one we're going to learn, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of the overall, because in this case it was very, very difficult to get people to take aside the time because they're with their kids. They want to do a little bit of everything. But hopefully we got enough, and we got enough learnings for the next round. Does that answer your question?
Let me just add that I think for those of us in the museum community, one of the questions we're going to have is, do our current evaluation techniques work for programs that involve 3D technology? I mean, do we have to adapt? Do we have to think of other ways to measure the effectiveness of what we're doing because the content and the experience is so different? Or do the traditional evaluation techniques work as well? So I think we'll all be interested to see your results.
Another question here.
I have a question for Benjamin and his finite element models. My name is Karim Gench. I'm from Simpleware. So from my experience, I've seen a lot of finite FEA analysis done on kind of looking at the stresses and strains of the context of the artifact from where it came. And if I understood correctly, you did an FEA analysis before you actually moved the artifact. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's kind of an interesting thing to consider FEA use in movement of artifacts around and things like that. Can you elaborate on other contexts you can see image-based finite element analysis used within archaeological contexts?
Well, definitely. The thing about finite element analysis, it's supposition, and if we document the submarine and say a submarine is the surface of a 6-sided box, and the box is measures 1 foot cubed. If that box differs in size slightly, the real results of the FEA analysis aren't changed massively. So there are very slight nuances that can be changed, but trying to decide on exactly what's going to happen to the finite element model has got a rather broad strokes in understanding what's going on. Main problem is when you've got to move a submarine that's a national heritage artifact, and you don't want to drop it because I'll be on a slow boat back to England if that happened. You want to do as much work as you can, and you want to have redundancy. Everything gets put out for peer review, so you've got time for something like that. When it comes down to smaller artifacts, is there a need to be able to do FEA? Depending on the provenance, and integrity of that object, then I'd say yes, there is. But again, it's budgetary considerations as well. So we'd like to have scope as well, but try as it is to a pinning and coming up with the absolute perfect FEA. It depends on the object itself.
Other questions? We're a little blinded by the light up here, so I can't always
There's
see.
one right here.
One right in the front.
Okay, so Julian Raby yesterday was talking about the problem of contextualizing objects. The kind of point cloud data that you collected for the Hunley seems like something that, given the Oculus head system, it would actually allow you to walk through the Hunley in some fashion. And then what I was thinking about was, if you did that, could you also put haptic feedback so that you could pick up objects inside the Hunley? And if you did, and you put them down in other places, would they then be there for other people to pick up from that place or not?
Whoa, dude. Firstly, it's only 4 foot high, so you'd have to be Lilliputian and have to walk through it that way, or crawl. But that's a great question. We at Clemson have got a Center for Aviation and Automotive Research called CABES, and we do immersive environments for walking into the cockpit of a plane, projection-based augmented reality systems, and heads-up virtual reality systems. Having that haptic response and picking something up, that would be something I've not really considered, but I can imagine a need for it. I can imagine as a research tool, that would be very interesting, being able to operate part of the submarine and being able to rotate the crank to be able to make the submarine move. That puts in new mental pathways in to help the archaeologists understand what the crew were thinking at the time whilst it was being used. So yes, there are many, many different ideas I can come up with, so it would be very interesting to pursue.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Ben Kemp. I work at the Holton Arms School in their IT department. Corey, I think what you have done is extremely impressive, and I hope that our school gets to that point sometime in the future. What advice would you give through a K-12 environment to get to where you are now?
Do it. This is sort of, I'm a full-time chemistry teacher as well as doing this on the side, and it's something I love to do anyway, and it's great that I can share it with it. But it was really only after working with a parent's 3D printer outside and getting that involved and being able to actually show them stuff that we could do with it that it really clicked last year, and they're like, oh wow, we really have to buy one. And then as soon as we had one, just sort of like looking out and trying to make partners, and I saw that the 3D scanning had started something through on Facebook or online, and I made some contact out and made contact with Vince and just sort of took off from there. But it's just really, there's a lot of questions, like talking with different maker spaces and things like that. There's this open question of like, all right, we got these tools, what do we do with it? And really no one has all the answers yet, and that's really exciting. But it's also important, like one great thing about all of the teachers I get to work with is that we don't have to teach the test, we don't do things, so there's no major issues if you fail at something. So if something does not work as planned, we're fine with that. But I can see a lot of schools out there where the idea of putting risk into some pretty intense lessons could get some very negative feedback, or you can get a lot of teachers that are just don't know what to do with it. But I think especially with the resources coming out now and knowing that there are other people out there, there's researchers out there, there's museums out there that are helping to support that, it's as good a time as any to get out there and just start doing things, finding teachers who are interested and supporting them with a bit of time to get them going. And so many of them just get so super excited about it that they can start moving forward on their own. But just do fun things, especially once kids get excited and they get in the car and they tell their parents about what they did that day, you win. That's gonna come back around and help generate so much more. So if you can make those great little ride home moments, if you will, you'll win.
I mean, I think that's the same advice that if you're in a museum and you want to get started, is that you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of equipment. It's just doing it in one way or another. Or, when you saw here the first pop-up one, those were personally owned 3D printers by people that we knew that brought their personal 3D printers in. And so just doing it and trying some things out, because then you'll also see what flies in your institution and what excites people around you, the public, the audience, the people that you work with, because in the end, those are all the stakeholders that will get excited when good things happen. So starting small is actually a good way, because then you can really see what in your context is really engaging to the people around you.
And it's so new that a lot of people just don't know what to do with it anyway, so until they have it in their hands, and they start playing with stuff, even if it's not high quality, even if you don't have a 3D printer yet and you're just working with Play-Doh or scanning or any of these other things like that, if you get out there and just start doing it, people will start making the trail themselves.
I'll throw one to the panel before we take our next question. I think all of you have raised, at least implied in a couple of instances, that there was some resistance to embracing this technology, maybe amongst your supervisors or your colleagues or other people because it's a new item. I mean, were there, other than just proof of concept starting small, were there particular tactics that were successful in helping people to embrace something that was a new way of doing an old thing?
Mostly it's the feeling of support, knowing that there's someone out there that will help them through it has been one of the big things. Just like saying, hey, we'll give you the hand, or they're even just knowing that there are people out there that are working on it as well, being able to. I know a few of our history teachers are now totally on board, but that's only after we had a chance to talk with some historians and people that work at the American History Museum for some of our work with the Life Mass, and they realized how much rich support there is out there. But there's just varying amounts of, like one of my teachers just is not very interested in having a 3D at all in the high school classroom, but is going to totally be excited about the viewer. So like there's very different parts to it that will reach out to them. So as long as you have lots of options, I think there are ones that will fit, because every teacher is different, every classroom is different. Like there's not gonna be one killer solution for this, one killer app to solve this.
And I don't see as much resistance as maybe not understanding what the benefits are necessarily.
Right.
So, or how it fits in with certain people's jobs, how much time we should be spending on it. And but so much of that, and I think you brought this up, is getting it in people's hands. So, you know, some of the workshops we do are with ourselves, and so that we ourselves can kind of think through how does it impact us. And that's why I think it's really important just to get something out there, share it with the people that are around you, and have the discussion. And I know the first few times where we had 3D printers around, there's something about it that really engages people's imagination, maybe because it's so different. Because, you know, I personally love a lot of different maker things, but it seems like there's something specifically about having a 3D printer there printing that people that I'm around that don't necessarily come up with ideas all the time, not that they're not, would walk by and say, you know how that could be used, you know how that, and so if for some magical reason these certain tools are just open up this floodgate of ideas, hey, but you have to have it there, you can't talk about it, you've got to kind of show it and start engaging in conversation about it.
Absolutely.
Hi, Todd Hopkins with Hillman & Carr here in Washington, D.C. Feeding right off of what you just said, I wanted to ask about your experiences with barriers and methods and tools for wider sharing and collaboration. You talked about putting tools in people's hands, letting them engage with them, creating models. You can share that in small groups. I still see a huge need and desire for much broader sharing and standards. If you think far in the future, you know, the YouTubes and the Instagrams for 3D. When a kid makes one of these wonderful 3D models, as your kids have done, they want to share that as broadly as possible, and there's a huge reward in that. And increasing the popularity is going to have a great deal to do with increasing the visibility and the understanding. What have your experiences been with tools and barriers there?
Well, you brought up Thingiverse, which is a big thing for basically, I think it aspires, and then there are a lot of other ones that are coming up too. That's kind of the issue, is if there are 20 different places to share, then it's kind of hard to know. And I'm not saying one is better over another. So I think that right now it seems to be Thingiverse, and your research kind of supported that, but there are other places that are supporting it. And then I'll hand it over to you, Corey. I think one of the things that should be a feature in all of these, that you put it up there, that it's free and open, and what's really nice is when you can tie it to lineages and genealogies, because I know that Thingiverse has a very simple version of this, and I'd love to see more of this. That ogre puppy that I showed comes from 2 artworks that are on Thingiverse. So it's so great to show what is this a derivative of, and you start seeing how it'd be great to get some visualizations about how works are inspiring new works and how you have these new genealogies of imagination. So that would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I assume this is something, this is so much with education that some other market is going to figure it out and we're going to go on board. Like very few things, like when you talk about iTunes or all these other things like that, other people are going to make decisions and we'll figure out how to make it work. I don't know if we're going to have enough voice in it, but I mean, Thingiverse has a great start to it, especially showing they have now things on there where you can customize things that already exist on there. But like we're working on a remote control hovercraft and the fans we had didn't work, but we could go on Thingiverse and there's a great DIY community on there where we found a propeller that someone had designed for their quadcopter that we were able to download in half an hour. We had a new propeller on our thing that was working much better than we had before. And so, but it's also going to be interesting if you talk about having millions of items on there, how do we think about how those items relate? And like these ideas of the lineage and things like that are going to become important to how do we classify, just as you'd be classifying all the paleontological things, how about all the things that people make? Like how do we find it? Because I don't believe that our idea of just keywords is really going to carry forward much further into the future. So someone out there, someone here, could be maybe working on an idea to how to share those in a way that can make it really easy to move from one object to another.
And I think another thing we'd really love to see, aside from lineage, is that because that you're working on other people's, is that people's works and deriving their works, is that it also just builds this maker community even more strongly.
There's another question over here.
Hi, I'm Al Hillman here in Washington, and something went by rapidly and no one talked about was Arduino, and I'm interested in how far that's gone in the schools and at your creative level, because tying together movable parts and mechanics and art and controllers like Arduino. Is anything happening there?
So I'm pretty new to the Arduino. I've only been doing it for a couple years. I know a bunch of really great people that know so much more than me.
Can you explain a little bit of what that is for anybody watching who might not know?
Little microcontroller, which basically means it's a super simple computer which can do basic commands, but you can buy these for $30. So you can do like for robotics, for automation, and if you ever go to Kickstarter, there's just tremendous amount of stuff out there based on this open source system. But I have things now that's going to be our control system for the remote control hovercraft or their cars, or working on a way to lock up our DSLR cameras in our art room. And there's a great community out there as well. And if you go #MakerEd, there's some really brilliant people that have been doing a lot of stuff that I definitely use a lot for resources. But there's also a lot of local hacker spaces or maker spaces. I know there's HackDC around here. Well, Alberto, I think, was around. I don't know if he's still here, but there are really amazingly, wonderfully intelligent people that know more than I could ever tell you, that are often just ready to help at a moment's notice. I don't know if I'm signing him up for anything, but don't hold me to that or him to that. But there's a lot of great resources out there in the communities. I know just started working with the Hacktory and other places inside of Philadelphia, looking at how we can make connections between informal education and bringing that into the classroom. But there are a lot of people doing interesting things and just trying to figure out how to fit that into your regular classroom environment has been the main challenge, because how do you do projects that intense and that interesting that develop over time when you have 40 minutes a day or 80 minutes every other day? That's where I think the biggest challenge for these is not the lack of interest or lack of access or expertise. It's just our current format of education. How do we fill this in? How do I grade someone who built an AND gate over 3 weeks from himself, and how do I, is that an A? I don't really know how to deal with those things. So there's a lot of other questions like that. How do we fit that into our model? I know a lot of Maker Ed, as you've probably seen, just kind of want to ditch the model and run for it. So there's this weird sort of crossing line about, can we integrate this, or should we even integrate this into the regular classroom?
I have a question for the panel. Maybe a lot of you have been talking about how to inspire others about what the technology can bring to your different professions. But if you had unlimited resources with the technology that's out there right now, what would you do? Would you just do more of what you're doing in terms of volume? Or is there some big idea that you just are dying to do but don't yet have the opportunity to make it real? I know it's hard to dream, but try.
Personally, for me, I think one of the biggest things that slows us down is texture mapping. and trying to get a relatively good texture on a complex surface. So coming up with a way to effectively, like we've been discovering today, texture map or incorporating structured light scanning with much, much, much higher resolution texture mapping, so you can kind of set the scene per scan and you don't have to go back and take that laborious time texture mapping. If that could be researched, and then the other thing would be something that would make me coffee every morning for breakfast.
Yeah, I think there's so much fantastic open source technology out there that I don't get to in a day, that I think if someone could invent time, I think that's a big challenge for those of us who want to start incorporating these new kinds of things in and figure them out, is just really knowing how to make time when we do have full-time busy jobs to fit it in, and if we could find more time to do exploration and make sure that we have that, Google has the 20%, and we certainly we can't get 20% of our time to experimenting and seeing if we can move forward, but if I could have anything, that would be it.
Right. I think that also makes a nod towards the importance of people in this process, is that it's not just the machine, it's the people who help other people use the machine to do something great. And so whether it's your time or the time of additional people that are working with you, it really does still take real people to make this stuff come to life and to dream up what you can do with it.
I have a question over here on the side. The right side is striking back after 6 questions from the left side. Finally, the right side is stepping up. Sir.
Thanks. This is not a question about education, but about, for Dr. Rennison, but about underwater archaeology and scanning. So if the Hunley was in shallow water, has anybody gotten scanners down to really deep shipwrecks?
So first, the preamble is we recovered the shipwreck, and we luckily kept it in a tank where we pressed a button, came back half an hour later, and there'd be no water in it, so we'd be able to walk into the tank, and then we craned all our equipment into it every day. So we were pretty lucky. I could go back for coffee every 10 minutes if I wanted. So most maritime archaeologists suffer a lot more than I did. But I think, yeah, there's a lot of complexities that are required to do it. And if you were, the ability to be able to record maritime wrecks, there is the University of Kentucky Center for Visualization. Dr. Lawrence Hasselbrook has looked into developing an underwater structured light scanner, and that's calibrated underwater, of course. But there's a lot of issues with that. If there's muck in the water, you kick up sand, you can't capture, and then underwater photogrammetry as well. So there is research being done into that too. I know that you can use laser scanning to some effect, but being an archaeologist, I always want the color. So.
Got another question here.
I do have an education question. A lot of the makers have come out of the art world. There's an intimate connection there. A lot of the tools are, traditionally Western art is how does light fall on objects, how do you reproduce reality, all of that. So do you see this making any difference as far as the discussion between STEM education and putting the A in, putting the art back and making it STEAM education?
I don't think I have enough letters that I put in there, because I think STEM and STEAM, we're going to start adding English, and we'll have to add another E, and then we're going to have to start adding other. But it's like, I work very closely with our art teachers. They're very excited about it. Just meeting with artists that have been here today have been really amazing to hear about their stories and trying to make connections. I know one of the things we do, we have a senior comprehensive project work at our school. And as of last year, once kids started hearing what we've been working on, and as seniors who hadn't been part of it, since I worked mostly with underclassmen for that, there's just so many ways that we can work with this. And so it's really trying to not just think about what it is in our school, but how we can make those connections to outside of our school to bring in a lot of these amazing expertises. So if you know a school or you have connections, regardless, I mean, I would love it to be mine, but like, make connections to whatever schools are out there, because there are kids that are looking to have someone who has that little bit of extra time, which has that technique, or things that might not exist in the school currently, but can grow through those partnerships. Because I think it really, like looking at what it can do now for history, talking with the Smithsonian, was something I don't think really people had really thought about how to make history hands-on in that way, and so many other aspects to it. Because I think it's really just across the spectrum to what you want to do and just freeing you up to make amazing stuff for the classrooms.
And coming from an art museum perspective, I think we really want to see this employed, or these kind of maker techniques, not just employed to get something done, but to think through design thinking, creativity, just kind of, and it might be that you're still going to go into, science needs creativity to solve big problems. So I think the way that in education things gets framed, it's kind of tricky, but I definitely think that if what we can do as an art museum is help other people incorporate how creativity and that kind of thing works into it but I think it's also just built in to the maker, the kind of maker activities in themselves, because you get new ideas, and we should encourage that it shouldn't be, that's not something that a maker activity is not something that you have like an end product that is already specified, that it's something that is a process, and it's process oriented, and from that process creativity can be born.
So I think that was a great question to end on. Really talks, I think, shines the light on a theme today, which is that 3D technology really can be the bridge between the disciplines. Today we had a history, art, and science all mentioned up here today, and I think that the technology that's out there gives us a chance to draw some really great unexpected connections and create even more engaging experiences for the audiences and the students and the researchers that we serve. Thank you so much for joining us today.